What's up, guys? It's D22 Sosa, Wayne Chiang on the Live Bike Poker Stream. This is the PokerCraft podcast. My VIP guest, Greg Raymer.
Howdy. How you doing, Wayne?
All right. Greg Raymer is the 2004 World Series of Poker main event champion. He defeated David Williams, who I'm an acquaintance of from the Magic days. And one of the greatest World Series of Poker main event achievements is the following year you finished 25th out of 5,619 entrants. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a nice run again. I seem to be streaky like that because I didn't cash in the main event again for several years after that, like 8 or 10 years or something.
I mean, I thought the same 5 people make the final table of every World Series.
Well, that was back in the 90s, for rounders. And of course, it wasn't true then either. It just sounded good for the movie.
I thought that was one of the most realistic parts of the movie is like when you're justifying to your girlfriend that there's skill involved in poker. the other realistic one was
I know the feeling because that's how my wife felt about poker. When I started playing, even though I was playing small games and winning, she didn't think it was any different than going to the casino and playing roulette or slots. And she was sure I was gonna, I'd just been running good, I'd been lucky, and it was about to change. And that's why we made a deal that I had $1,000 for my poker bankroll, and that was it. And that if I lost it, I would quit playing poker. And her plan was that she figured I'm going to lose it, and then come New Year's, she'll let me have another 1,000 for the next year.
I mean,
and
I don't know what to say. That's like a pretty good system.
Well, like I said, it was just funny. I mean, I was working as a patent lawyer, making good money, so it's not like I could afford to lose more than 1,000 and still be fine and all that. But back then, the main game was like 3-6 limit hold'em.
Yeah.
And just like now, you go into a poker room anywhere in the country, the most common game is either 1-2 or 1-3 no limit.
Right.
Then it was 3-6 limit was the one you saw most often, and so I was able to build that up. And then she finally came around when we moved to Connecticut, and we had been trying to buy a house in California, and 5% down payment, you'll get basically just as good terms as if you have 20 or 30% down in California. But in Connecticut, if you didn't have 20%, it was like the only loan we could get was like, oh, here's the first 80% at the normal going rate, and then the second mortgage for that other 15%, and it was like credit card rates, wow. So it was like huge, way too expensive. And then I had my best result to date, technically finishing second, but in the deal winning the tournament at Foxwoods for like $22,000. And so now it was like I came home and I'm like, we have enough for the 20% down. And so we were able to buy that house we wanted. And so then all of a sudden, it'd be like if I was sitting around the house on Saturday, she was like, well, if you're not doing anything, why don't you go down to... Yeah, Foxwoods is 6 miles away. Why don't you go play poker if you're not doing anything else? So, that changed your opinion quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. I mean, to give her credit, more lives are ruined from poker than successes, but it's definitely possible. Like, there's still, quite a few successful pro players today.
Well, I wouldn't say ruined. I mean, you may be correct technically, but it's a pretty small percentage that are ruined, and it's a pretty small percent, even smaller percent that make a living at it. So your statement's technically correct, but I wouldn't want people to think that a majority of people who play poker are ruining their lives. It's just 95%. It's just a hobby they can afford, and it's 3 or 4% to go way too far, and the 1 or 2% make a living.
I guess my perspective's skewed because most of my networks obviously has been pros, and a lot of them didn't turn out well and they were competent players, but it's always the life habits more so than the skill that kind of ruined them.
Yeah, I mean, I get asked very often, well over 1,000 times since '04, people who come up to me or email me and they're like, hey, I'm thinking of quitting my job or quitting school, becoming a full-time pro. And I always tell them, like, okay, look, I don't have to know anything about you to advise you not to do it. Because without knowing them, it's at least 90% of them that just aren't good enough. And of those that are good enough, like you said, there'll be something else wrong. Like, well, they are good enough when they play their best, but they go on tilt too easy and don't always play their best. Or they will win at poker and then lose that much and more at sports betting or other pit games or whatever. Or they'll party and spend it on drugs and partying and they still will end up going broke. And then finally you get the tiny percent that have the skill that avoid all the problems. And then it's like, wait, it's 10 years down the road. I'm, bored with this. I don't want to do it anymore. And I have this massive gap in my resume. Now what? Now what do I do?
Yeah, I tell people it's one of my regrets. Like, obviously, to stay under the radar, you're supposed to like not show yourself, and then if things go bad, now you're really screwed. But I guess developed other things. But it's just it's difficult in a sense that like it's doable. Some people make a great living,
Yeah.
but like it looks obviously a lot easier than television. And then when people see you like win the main, and I think you satellited in through PokerStars, is that correct?
That is correct, but I was playing anyway. So to me, winning, I mean, it was literally the last online satellite you could enter on PokerStars that year. It was a double shootout. So it was like 130, 40, 50, I forget the number now, 60. And it was like 9 tables of 9, win your table, advance. The final table, second through ninth, got prize money, but it really wasn't much better than get your money back. And so it was almost winner take all, though not quite. And it was like the 10,000 seat and 1,000 spending money. And that was in '04, so they didn't give you the 10,000. It wasn't in your account. It was like you were going to be entered in the main event, like it or not. And if you couldn't show up, you were going to get blinded off, and that was that. It was play it or lose it.
So you have a law degree, and you did chemistry undergrad. I think you have a master's.
Yeah, I have a bachelor's in chemistry. Excuse me, a master's degree in biochemistry, and then I was a chemical and biotech patent lawyer for 12 years.
So while this is not in the patent attorney domain, what do you think of PokerStars doing that? Just like you have to show up.
Well, I mean, you knew that or should have known that when you registered. It wasn't like hidden in the fine print. This is a satellite and you were going to be put in the main event. If you had emailed them and said, hey, look, here's some evidence and I was in a car crash and I'm in the hospital and I can't fly, they might have figured out a way to accommodate you, like we'll roll this over to next year's main event or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there were something, I was told, like as many as like 40 no-shows to the '04 main event. And wow. I don't mean PokerStars, I just mean people who paid one way or another and didn't actually show up to play. And one thought people had was like, I wonder how many of these were like 18, 19, 20-year-olds who didn't realize, like, oh, no, like I can play on PokerStars, but I'm not allowed to play the main event.
Need to be 21
or did they
over.
Just not show for whatever other reason? If you're from some countries, you need to get a visa. Did you think about that? Did you get one soon enough? Or did you blow it off and now that you're about to go to the airport and it's like, oh no, you can't board without a visa? I don't know what happened to any of them, and I don't know if that number is correct.
Well, there's always going to be urban myths. So you practice as a patent attorney for Pfizer.
Yeah, I spent the last half of my career at Pfizer. That's why I was living in Connecticut. I took a job with them. They had their biggest research facility in Southeast Connecticut, and So our house, I had a nice house out on a little country road because that's a very rural part of the state, and it was like 6 miles due south of Foxwoods, and that's where I really built up my bankroll. Was they had this great no limit tournament on Tuesday night, and based on the size of the field, I was supposed to have won that tournament about once every 2 to 3 years, but I was winning it like 4, 5, 6 times a year
Wow.
because people were just really bad at poker back then, especially no limit and especially tournaments.
So, what year was this?
Moved there late '98, and
98.
so
Okay.
that tournament that I won was late '98, the Foxwood World Poker Finals, like a $500 limit hold'em event. I mean, it's funny too. Like things always change, usually for the better, because I mean, like probably one of the main reasons I can attribute to winning that tournament is I lose a hand and I only have 600 tournament chips left. We are about to race off. This was the last hand before the break, and we're going to race off the 100 unit chips. So I have one chip in the race, and
And you
everyone
got
else
it?
at my table had like 3 or 4 chips. But back then, it was the one high card gets all the chips.
Oh my gosh. And you get it?
And that was the
You
way
got it.
everyone did it back then. And so instead of having 500 or maybe 1,000, I win the race and have 3,500. And now we're coming back to blinds of 500, 1,000, 1,000, 2,000 limits. And now I actually, like the next hand I played, I raised and everyone folded.
Wow.
If I don't win the race, I can only call all in. So it's just, crazy things like this that happen. And when someone finally was like, hey, why don't we do like how many, like, oh, there's 6 chips available. We'll take the 6 people with the high, like once you think of it, it's like, well, duh. Like that's, why weren't we always doing it this way? And yet no one did. And it was just like, I just wrote an article for Card Player talking about re-entry and rebuy. And I was saying how back then, like if they said the tournament's at 7, if you got like caught in traffic or something and you didn't get to the registration desk till 7:01, it was like, sorry, tournament started, you can't play,
Wow.
because the whole concept of late registration didn't exist. Like the only late registration you would see back then is they might say something like, okay, wait, it's 7 o'clock, Wayne, you're the last person in line. If anyone comes up behind you, tell them they're not allowed to register.
Oh my god.
Like, we will finish processing the 6 of you that are here waiting in line, but anyone else who walks up now, no. Well, they're not going to do it.
That's
And
like
that was just the
insane.
way tournaments were handled. And it's like, well, wait. I mean, it'd be like it was a rebuy tournament, too. So it's like, wait, everyone who's in the tournament is allowed to rebuy for like an hour or two, but I can't show up 1 minute late and get in. And so it was just, I mean, that was the reason to do late reg, was just like, don't screw over Wayne because he got caught in traffic and got here a minute late, or.
I mean, there's a
And
lot of reasons. They need to make more money for the tournaments. They need to, pump up the
that
guarantees.
came later. That came later. The original rationale was simply, let's not like piss off an otherwise good customer because they were running late. I mean, when I lived in San Diego County and I would be trying to play like a 7 p.m. tournament at Ocean's 11, and I have to drive from La Jolla up to Oceanside and I would sometimes leave my
Traffic.
office at 3 p.m. and maybe barely get there in time for a 7 p.m. start. I mean, that's how bad traffic was. So it's like, how pissed are you going to be when you slog through 4 hours of traffic, but because it was 4 hours and a minute, now you can't play?
What years were you in San Diego?
95, 98,
Oh, okay.
that like a 3 year period there.
All right, I missed you by a few years. But yeah, it was 3-6 limit hold'em. The other inefficiencies were when you table change, you could come behind for free. There's like a lot of inefficiencies. No flop, no
Yeah.
drop. There's like a lot of stuff.
Well, and some of those things that, were actually really intelligently fixed, and then players didn't like them and they went back. So, like, for I think 2 years at the World Series, they had a rule that when you registered late, when you got to your table, you either had to wait for the big blind or post, kind of like a cash game. And players just bitched and moaned about it, and they changed it. And they were probably right to change it, just in the sense that there was way more players that didn't like it than players that did. And I'm like, why do you want to let this guy like last minute register and then sit down behind the button and get all these free hands? Because that equity is coming from all of us at the table.
Yeah.
They are, and that was the thing. You don't have a duty. Like when they break your table in a tournament, there's a rule that says you have to promptly go to your new table. But when you late reg, there is no rule that says you have to promptly go to the table. And you could walk up towards the table, see that like, oh, I'm in seat 3 and that's about to be the big blind. I'm just going to walk over here, look at my phone for a few minutes, and then I'll come back and sit down. And even if we see you do it, there's no penalty because there's no rule against it.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we might go, oh man, that guy's a jerk, but there's nothing we can do about it. The floor might say, don't do that again, but they're going to say that to you if you do it 20 more times that summer.
Right.
So,
they're not going to ban you over that.
But players complained about it so much that, Jack Effel and his team changed it back. And if that's what 80-90% of the players wanted, that's probably what they should do. But I was like, why do so many people want it this way? I mean, they just don't want it. They're just impatient. It's not even because it's like, because I want to take advantage.
Yeah.
It's not the I want to take advantage of this rule, so don't change it back. It's just I don't want to, like when I register and go to my table, I don't want to have to sit there and wait, and I don't want to have to post. Okay, so let the angle shooters steal your equity.
Whew. So you started off pretty much as a winning hobbyist, since obviously you were a patent attorney. What year?
Yeah.
So you started about 98, and then what was the trajectory?
Well, I moved to Connecticut in 98. I started playing poker in 92.
Oh, okay.
And before that, I was a blackjack player. So while I was going to school at the University of Minnesota for that master's degree and for the law degree, instead of your more traditional student job like waiting tables or something, I would go to the tribal casinos there and count cards, and made like $7.50 an hour on average over those years, which back then was good because I think minimum wage was $3 or less at the time. And then when I got my first job as a lawyer, I was in Chicago, and the riverboat casinos did not have very good rules.
What were they?
Like 8-deck shoes and bad penetration, and like only could double down on a 10 or an 11, and
bad rules for the player.
Yeah, bad rules for the player in the sense that now as a card, even with counting cards, I could not realistically make any money. The only way to beat those games really was a team approach. And so I accidentally found a poker game, and like when I played with my friends in college every now and then. So I knew the rules, flush beats a straight and blah, blah, blah. But had never studied the game, never put any effort into it or anything. And so I found this game, and I'm like, well, this was fun. Maybe I can make money at this. And I went to a used bookstore, and they had 3 books, so I bought them all. One was The Education of a Poker Player by Herbert Yardley, which I do not recommend for strategy reasons, but it's a fun read because this guy was some kind of like code breaker in the like World War II, Cold War era. So he tells some story about espionage, and then it was like, and then we were playing a stud game, and so now I will tell you the rules of stud and how to play stud. There was the second book was Poker According to Maverick, which was obviously not written by Maverick, but it was written as if by Brett Maverick of the Maverick, TV shows and movie fame. So, it had his image on it, and some ghostwriter did it. And the third book, which is the one that really mattered, was The Theory of Poker by Sklansky. So there is where I developed a sound, basic understanding of poker concepts and was able to improve my game. And, later I found other books like, Limit Hold'em for Advanced Players, since that was the main game being played. And like Ray Z's high-low split poker book on Omaha high-low and stud high-low and so on and so forth. But I was just lucky I found that really good book at the beginning, so that because that's the way I do a lot of poker teaching as well. I do seminars. I've got the book I've written. I have private lessons over Zoom like this with students, and I do not teach charts. Even if I provide a chart at any point, it's not with the understanding that you should like memorize this chart and always do it. I prefer to teach concepts. So here are the things you need to think about that will enable you to make the best decision. And so like, oh, should I play Jack 10 suited? Well, obviously there are situations where you would always play it, and there are situations where you would never play it. And it's not just based on position and stack size. It's like who's entered the pot, and how deep are the stacks, and is this the bubble? Are you the big stack on the bubble? Well, there's so many factors that really need to be considered. If I say always fold deuce 7 offsuit, well,
Not always true.
even that's not perfect advice. It's going to be right almost all the time, but occasionally there'll be the spot where it's like, no, like, you shouldn't fold it. And even though it's also extremely rare, there's going to be some spots, and not just in satellites, where you're correct to fold 2 aces.
That's
it
hard
might
for
not
me to
come
do.
up your
Yeah.
Well, like in a cash game, it would never be correct. I cannot think of a cash game scenario where you should fold 2 aces pre-flop. But I have actually witnessed in a tournament a spot, and not a satellite tournament, but a spot where the guy was 100% correct to fold 2 aces. And I was so thrilled when I saw it, because I was like, oh my God, I've been trying to figure out, like, there must be a spot. And like, now, well, here it is. Like, yeah, and this is perfect. There's no doubt he should fold 2 aces here. And so I was thrilled when I saw that. That was like the bubble of the main event being televised back, I don't know, 12 years ago or more.
So can you explain to the audience what the situations are to
Well,
fold
in this
aces
spot, he had, I don't know when he had gotten this short, but they're doing the hand for hand on the bubble. And you've got something like 600 and some spots getting paid. So I don't remember the numbers, but let's say it was 650 spots getting paid, and there's 651 left. And the min cash was like 22,000. And this guy is in the cutoff with 6 antes. So even if he like gets 2 aces right now, goes all in, he's only calling. He cannot raise. There's no doubt he's at least going to get called by the 2 blinds, and maybe more. And if he wins, he's still only going to have maybe 2 big blinds or something. So he's still going to essentially be all in by the time he gets to the blinds a few hands later. And so he just doesn't gain any value. If he wins this pot, it doesn't grow his stack enough to where it really matters. And so with the 650 or whatever people getting paid, he's going to get this $22,000 jump from 0 to 22. To double his money over that 22,000 and change, you had to get to 99th place. So, every jump, I mean, it's like, the min cash at 22.3 or whatever it was. And then that's the next like 100 people get that. And then the pay jump is like 22.7. So really it's all about this one jump. The ICM right now, this moment on this bubble is huge.
Very valuable. Yeah.
And then there's not going to be another bubble of this much significance maybe ever again in the tournament. There'll be bigger pay jumps.
Pay jumps, yeah.
There'll even be $1 million pay jumps. But in terms of how it changes what would be a correct play if we ignored ICM, this is probably the biggest impact moment in the whole tournament for ICM. And I don't know if the guy folded aces. The cameras are on him, and he kept telling the camera crew, he's like, don't bother. He goes, go film someone else. He's like, even if I get 2 aces, I'm just gonna fold. And some people were criticizing him, like on 2+2 or places, online and stuff, people talking about it when it was aired on TV. And it was like, no, he's correct. this is a spot to fold two aces. Now if he had had 10 blinds or something, if he had had enough chips where getting it all in and
Would
doubling up could actually give him some increase in
wiggle
equity,
room, yeah.
then that would be different. But here it's like he gets it all in, wins this pot. He'll quadruple up, quintuple up, or whatever, but he'll still only have a couple of blinds. So I was thrilled just to okay, great. Here is the true real world example. It's not some made up ridiculous one.
Yeah.
I mean, people would make things up like, oh, we're at the final table 9-handed and everyone has the same number of chips and all 8 of them go all in before you act. And it's just like, now would you fold 2 aces? And it's like, well, it may be correct to fold 2 aces in that spot because you're almost certainly going to get at least second place. There's not going to be, it's not that likely that there's a chop pot. But how are the 9 of us at the main event final table with everyone having the exact same number of chips, let alone under the gun open shoved and everyone else shoved behind him, and now you're in the big blind going, what's going on? I mean, come on,
it's 2 aces, yeah.
It's never gonna it's never gonna happen. So it may be a correct spot to fold 2 aces, but it's certainly
it's not going to come
if that never happens in the history of poker, I won't be surprised. And I mean not just the main event, but any multi-position paying tournament. If this was some kind of shootout, then yes, it's the first hand. Maybe we're all starting with the same stack size for that reason. But they don't start you off with 5 blinds. So why would everyone be all in before it got to you? Especially if we're paying each spot more and more money, as opposed to just winner take all, advance to the next round kind of a thing. So it's great, but I don't want to teach absolutes. It's one thing like when you look at the Limit Hold'em for Advanced Players book, they have lots of starting hand charts and like, oh, here's all the hands divided, group 1, group 2, and they say under the gun, play group 1 and group 2, and so on and so forth. And even though that's less than perfect, it's reasonably close to correct. There's not going to be too many spots where it's like, oh, I'm going to play looser or tighter because of my opponents and how they play. There will be those exceptions, but they won't be huge, and you won't be making a huge mistake if you follow the chart instead of changing based on your opponents. But in No Limit, you would have to have too many charts also. Like, well, how many blinds did Wayne raise to? Now that it's on me in the hijack with ace jack offsuit. And how deep are the stacks? And how deep are the stacks yet to act? And so even if we ignored the opponent, we're not going to even take into account, are you tight or loose, aggressive, passive, whatever in general. Even then, we would have to have different charts for every stack size. So it's just, telling a student oh, here's the hands you should raise with under the gun. I just don't think that is useful to really making them a good player.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do that as well. A lot of these things is books and training sites. They almost mimic they try to mimic the academia process, which is almost making people less bad than actually
if it looks strange, it's because my cat just jumped up on the desk. So
okay.
Nothing actually weird going on here. Just she likes to hang out on this towel that I put a towel, and she likes to hang out up here. So that's what's going on when you see me over here. When I'm like, what's he doing?
It's trying to practice Phil Hellmuth white magic. So what's the story behind the name Fossil Man and the glasses that you...
Well, the Fossil Man part, if we go back to the story about my wife and the $1,000 bankroll. So she had taken me to this rock and mineral show because she wanted to look at some stuff. And so I'm there looking around, and I'm not necessarily as interested in the kind of jewelry and stuff she's looking at. And here's a guy over here, and he's selling some fossils and stuff like that. And he has this one fossil. Then I'm like, oh, this is cool. and it's not that expensive, and it would be a great card protector. So I bought it, and when I went to Oceanside to play poker later that night, people were like, "What is that? What is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's this fossil, and it's 300 million years old." And they were like, "Wow, that must be worth a fortune." And I was like, "Well, it didn't cost very much." So I went back to that rock and mineral show the next day, and I bought a bunch more, and then immediately like sold them to people, and I was like marking them up like 5 times
Wow.
what I paid for them. So that was just a way to grow my bankroll.
That's
Like
awesome.
use my bankroll to buy the fossils, and so then I bought more fossils, and I got some different types, and then I would just always have like one of each type on the table, and I would just wait for someone to ask me about them, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, this is an Orthoceras, and this is an Ammonite, and da da da." And I'm like, "Oh, and if you're interested, I sell these." And most of my sales would be, let's say, a guy like you, or your age, older, younger, whatever, but in that broad category, who had a son that was maybe like, let's say,
Hmm.
5 to 15 years old. And it's like, "Oh, my son loves dinosaurs and fossils and stuff, and like I can buy that for just $15. Like, yeah, that'd be great. I'll take that home to him." And so I would average about one sale per trip to the poker room.
It's pretty good.
And since my average win might have been in the $30 to $40 range, and now I can add an extra like $10, $15 to that by selling a fossil. So it was, just a way to grow my bankroll quicker. And then the nickname
It's awesome.
happened quite organic. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think someone called me like, "Oh, yeah, you're that fossil dude." And I'm like, "Can we make it Fossil Man instead of Fossil Dude?" And he's like, "Yeah, whatever." And so that was my only input on the nickname, was just changing it to Fossil Man instead of Fossil Dude.
Hey, you never know. You could be like a
And
Marvel character too.
yeah, but my superpowers are pretty minimal.
Hey, you
It's
won
like,
the main event, but
range merging. Range merging is my superpower.
I mean, winning the World Series of Poker main event even one time in your life is still a superpower too.
Yeah. If I have a superpower, actually, it's test taking. I can always outperform my actual knowledge on any test.
I just if it's multiple choice, I
But that
just
one
do.
doesn't. That only goes so far. Like, you know, I would have loved to stay in school my entire life if you could actually make a good living at it.
Ouch.
But
uh,
it's not
so
like you can do that for a livelihood. So I had to, But I didn't finish school till I was 28. Between the bachelor's degree, the master's degree, the law degree. Then I was like, well, I better start actually making some money here instead of living off of scholarships and loans and stuff.
and poker.
I wasn't playing poker yet.
Oh,
I
you were.
mean,
What age were you
that was
when you started?
well. It's like when I graduated, I was 28 or almost 28. When I started working as a lawyer, I had only been 28 for a few months, and that's when I found poker. So that was that story about finding poker, because I finished law school and the blackjack games in Chicago weren't beatable like the ones back in Minnesota.
What were the Minnesota rules?
Well, the main thing was that there was zero heat, so you didn't even have to try to cover that you were card counting.
Wow.
Um, but even though they had like six deck shoes, they had really good penetration. So they were dealing off like at
Five
least
decks.
five decks on average out of the six before they would shuffle. I mean, I was only, because I didn't have a big bankroll, my betting range was $5 to $25. There was a guy there who would do the min five bet, and then
Go to
he'd bet as high
100.
as 500. He'd bet up to 500,
Wow.
and they didn't care. And then the other thing too that was hilarious, like you could hear him counting under his breath. It was a game where the cards are face up. You don't touch your cards. And as the dealer's putting the cards in front of people, you could hear him like he's looking at the cards and he's like plus one, zero, plus one. You could hear him mumbling it under his breath, and they just didn't care. So it was like games were great, and pretty, like I said, decent rolls. And he should have been making, like, if he was using my system and not making mistakes, he should have been making at least 50, maybe as much as $100 an hour.
Yeah, if you 50x, 500. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
Um,
but He eventually got kicked out, but it wasn't for counting. It was for his his temper. Because when he
Oh,
would lose the bigger bets, he'd get mad and he'd swear at the dealers, and a few times even like would pick up the cards and throw them at the dealer. So
wow.
they eventually kicked him out for his behavior. And it was
Wow.
just like, you idiot, man! You should be making $50 an hour or more. You know, you're talking six-figure income in
Like back
this.
then.
You could live out in the country, you know, because it wasn't like these casinos were in Minneapolis. You had to drive out for like an hour and a half to get to them.
Mm.
So he didn't have to live in a more expensive part of town. And like my starting salary as a lawyer in downtown Chicago was like 63,000 a year, something like that. So I mean, this guy should have been making double that, and he could buy himself a mansion out in the country and have money to spare. And he's going to blow it because he can't control his temper. Silly rabbit.
How'd you learn about blackjack counting, card counting? Was it MIT stories? Kent Houston?
No, it was odd. On my mom's side of the family, because she had seven brothers and sisters, so there's lots of relatives. And so they had decided at some point, like for Christmas, instead of people buying gifts for everybody, we would do like the, you know, Santa thing. Everyone would just pick one name. So all the adults, like kids, would still get gifts from everyone. But for the adults, it was we would put all the names in a hat and pick it, and then it'd be like, oh, I pulled Wayne's name, I got to give you a gift, you know, and you pulled, you know, my mom's name, you'd give her a gift, and so on. And for some reason, an aunt had picked my name, and she gave me this thing called the world's greatest blackjack book
Wow. Okay.
on card counting, and even today it's still out in print, and I would still recommend it if you want to just go and count cards, because it goes from the very basics, like the first chapters are literally teaching you the rules of the game,
Mm.
and then it teaches you basic strategy, and then it teaches you how to
High
count
low.
cards, and then it teaches you how to add in, like if you want to separately track the aces, and then, oh, do you want to like do strategy changes, like, oh, you're supposed to hit your 16 against the dealer 10, but not if the count's plus 6 or higher. So it'll, you know, you can start doing strategy changes based on the count. So you can go as detailed as you want within this book, and you know, to the extent you can get away with it and not get barred by the casino, you could, you know, probably get at least a 1% edge most places, most games.
Sure. I mean, if you don't get booted, then you could, be more careful. Like by the time I was doing it, like no, it's it's a lot of heat very quick. So what's the story behind the glasses, though? The
That was
holographic
just the
glasses.
first time I played the main event was '02, and I was on vacation with my family like about a month or so before, and we were in Florida. I'd gone to Florida to go to Disney World with our little girl, and my wife and daughter loved gift shops, which means I get to spend lots of time in the gift shops as well. And so we had just done the Tower of Terror ride, which exits you into the back of the gift shop. And while they were shopping, I happened to find these just novelty glasses. And they had them with like, oh, here's a big eyeballs and here's a peace sign and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, you know, I don't normally wear sunglasses when I play, but you know, I'm going to play the main event for the first time. That might be kind of fun. It'd be a funny joke. I'll pull these out in the middle of a big hand, put them on. So I picked out those ones with the lizard eye hologram, and that's what I did. I was playing a reasonably big pot, middle of day one, and my opponent had like 3-bet pre-flop, and I called, and then he bets the flop, and I raise, and now he's in the tank, and he's counting his chips, and he's looking down and not paying attention to me because he's trying to count out like, okay, calling my raise will be this much, and I'll have this much left, and da da da. And he's doing all that, and I'm like, ooh, and I like reached into my little pocket and pulled out and put those glasses on, just sat there and stared at him. And then when he finally like looked up at me again, he was just like, what?
Ugh.
And the only reason he didn't like fall over backwards is he literally had to, like use his feet on the underside of the table
That's
to
hilarious.
catch himself because he like jumped back so hard in his chair. And then he's like, "What? You know, like, what's going on?" What? And then he, mucked his cards, and I took the glasses off, and I thought, maybe I won't just make this a one-time joke. And from that point on, every time I would enter the pot, so if it's pre-flop and I look down, oh, raise. I'd put out the chips and I'd put on those glasses, and then I'd just sit here like this and stare at you. And it annoys the hell out of people. It's
So
very annoying because you got the unblinking eyes staring at you. And I think people fold a little more often, or they did then when I
oh,
was unknown, because it's like as soon as you fold, the hand's over and the glasses just come off. And so, in other words, there's lots of decisions that are close. It's like, oh, I see bet the flop. Are you going to continue here? It's Queen 10-7, and you called my pre-flop raise with fives. It's like, yeah, I might have missed that flop, and you're ahead, and maybe you can raise and bluff me off pocket nines or something. Um, so it's not like it's obvious you have to fold or obvious you shouldn't fold. And since it's a decision that might go either way, I think people leaned just a little bit more. Like at the end of the day, maybe two times, three times in a whole day, someone might have folded that they otherwise wouldn't have.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. It's been almost 20 years since you won the main event Chris Moneymaker the year before. It's like a lot of things that there's some myth busters. Some things were shown to actually be things, so I definitely believe it. My thing would be like, do you weigh it versus like being remembered? Like they're like, oh, that's the guy with the
Well, I mean, at the time, I
glasses.
was only doing that in like tournaments, and I wasn't known. I wasn't trying to become known. Um, it turned out like, they asked me to come in early after maybe day two or something of that main event in '04. So at a point in time when it was way too early, it's not like even if I was a bigger stack, it's not like, oh, let's get this guy who's got the ninth biggest stack and interview him. It was just because of the glasses, because they were just looking for those novelty, quirky things. So they asked me to come in, do a little interview, and they had gone around and collected stuff. I mean, like there was one where they were talking to Eli Alezra when he was at my table, like later that day, and he said like, "Oh, they're so scary. It makes you want to fold or something." I forget what he said exactly, but he said, "It freaks me out. I don't like it," or whatever. And so they're just doing that as like part of their nut segment or something. Like, here's weird things players are doing, but that wasn't my intent. I wasn't wearing them for that reason. It's like I said, I put them on the first time the 2 years before, and then I was like, hey, this actually I think gets me a little bit of equity. It's not like I would say this is some amazing trick or
Sure.
whatever. It was just, a little bit of equity, a little bit of interest. And I don't mind being noticed and starting conversations. I love to talk to players at the table, because sometimes they will just give stuff away that you can use. So if we're playing the main event next summer and you're at my table and you're like, oh, this is my first time in the main event. Well, if we're still together at the end of the day, I'm going to assume that like just making day two means something to you. I could be wrong, but I will probably assume that you are going to be a little tighter at the end of the day, a little easier to run over than otherwise, just because, oh, this is your first main event. Or if you tell me like I've played a couple times, I haven't even made day two yet, I'd be like, well, that probably, I bet that means something to you. It means more than maybe it theoretically should, just to bag your chips and make day two. People who say like, oh, I've never cashed in the main event. It's like, okay, if we start getting near the bubble again, I can probably bully you more. If it's clear that like you don't care about the money, then I'll know that I can't bully you. But maybe I will try to look like I'm bullying you when I have a monster hand, because you'll think I'm bullying you and play back light or whatever. So, I mean, I will try to take advantage of the information I gain.
Right.
But it's also just like, let's just have friendly conversation and make this enjoyable for all of us.
So, how much play did you have with David Williams before getting with him heads up?
Basically none. We had never been at the same table until they put us at that 10-handed unofficial final table the night before. I I'm not sure we ever really competed in a pot of any significance at all. Even three-handed, there wasn't much. We weren't three-handed all that long, and I don't remember there being any significant pots at all involving him and I. Um, and then heads up, we only were dealt 7 hands, and the first six were all tiny pots that had no more than like 5 or 6 blinds in them. So
I don't
really, it was, you know,
I don't remember. You shoved on the river. How many big blinds was that, or in relation, or even relation to the pot at that juncture?
well, we were a little bit under 26 million chips, and it was something like 16 to 10 or 17 to 9, give or take, when he and I got heads up, and the big blind was 100,000. So we were deep. I
Right.
mean, as the shorter stack, he still had at least 80, maybe 90 blinds.
Hmm.
And the hand played out with him raising pre-flop. He was the small blind on the button. He raised, I called, and I had my pocket eights. He had ace four. Flop was 2-4-5 rainbow. Or I'm sorry, it's 2-4-5 with 2 diamonds.
Yep.
And I checked, he bet, I check raised, he immediately called. The turn was a 2, I bet again, he called. The river was a 2, I bet all in, he called. And he's been given a lot of crap for that hand, and I think he even gives himself some crap for the hand. But because of the 2 diamonds on the flop, there was certainly a significant part of my range that was just 2 overcard diamonds. Jack 10 of diamonds, Queen 9, King 8 of diamonds, all kinds of hands like that I might have check raised with the flush draw on the overcards and then barreled into him trying to get a fold from exactly the kind of hand he had. Pairing a deuce 4 or 5 isn't, even if he'd had ace 5 for top pair, it's not like it's that strong of a hand.
Yeah.
And not in the grand scheme of things, and not, for 90 blinds in total. So, I could have easily been trying to bluff him off of just exactly that kind of hand. And if I had turned over King Jack of diamonds or whatever,
Yeah.
then everyone would have called him a genius for playing the hand exactly the same way. So I don't, like I said, the only thing I would, like, if I had been coaching him back then, I'd be like, take more time. Like, even if you're going to make those same decisions, because it's like when I bet, like, I was sitting here in the 4 seat and he was down in like the 7, and so the dealer is just off my like left shoulder here. The 1 seat is right in front of me, and Matt Savage, tournament director, is standing over the 1 seat. And when I bet the river, I looked up at Matt and I said, I'm all in, because I knew it's like, if he hears me, no confusion. I'm not going to get a bad ruling that I said something else.
Right.
So I said it directly pointing at him. And David has said I call and tabled his hand before I could even turn my head to look at him. And so that'd be the only thing I would criticize, is take, at least 5-10 seconds here on something this, so even if you've already thought it through, because, the dealer was waiting to be told to put out the river card, and they'll pause for a few seconds. And then maybe I took 5 seconds before I looked at Matt and said all in. So you've had time to think. You might have already made up your mind, and that's fine. But, like, just let it sit for a few more seconds and think it through, just in case. So even if he makes the same decision, that's fine. But why not take 5 seconds? I don't ever tell my students to, like, sit there and tank. But for big decisions, take at least a few seconds. Because there are those times you like do something and then you're just like, oh shit, like I didn't think of that. Now I wish I had thought a little more before I made that decision.
I rewatched it last night actually. So Dave Williams just like shrugs and then puts his chips in, because I think, at his level of development, he was probably.
But the shrug was after he saw my cards, I think. He's like, I call, and he tabled his hand. and then I tabled my cards, and then he shrugged like, "Oh
Oh, he
well."
did. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he shrugged before he called, but I could be misremembering it. Um, I mean, they actually made it look on the tape. If you watch the video, I go all in, and
And
then
he
they
instantly
show
calls.
him for a couple of seconds. They show him like he's thinking a little bit before he says I call. So they
Yeah.
had to go back in time. It was
Oh,
like
so
the
it's edited.
timestamp. Yeah, because when I said like all in,
Contrasting style.
like I said, I wasn't quick enough to turn to get back into my pose before he said I call and tabled his ace four. And so they made it look like he thought for a few seconds before calling, but he didn't.
Okay, so
And
that
then
was
he's
just post editing.
called, he's
Yeah.
seen my cards, and then you see him shrugging like, oh, like I lost, shoot, whatever. And like I said, I don't, you could say you think he should have made other decisions, but I don't think any of his decisions were big mistakes. So it'd be the kind of thing that if we had a GTO computer, it would play the hand the same he did at
Yeah.
least some of the time. So even if you're like, oh no, it's 70% fold, 30% call on the river, or 80-20 or whatever, it's not like some GTO computer would never call in that spot.
Yeah. There's definitely no way it's always a fold. I would guess that it's frequently a call. I guess. I mean, I don't know. But this is a different era. Like I always tell the audience, depending on like what year it is, who you're playing against, what area, everybody plays differently. So it's like when people critique a hand, it's like you're always gonna have your own cognitive biases of like your own experiences,
Yeah.
the fields you play in, and just like even you've played in San Diego, like San Diego, LA, and the Bay Area, they all play differently. So
No, there is all that, and like you said, it's very different. And all the times I hear people, they'll talk about a hand and be like, well, obviously he has it, and I'm thinking like, boy, in the games I frequent, it's not at all obvious that he has it, or vice versa. It's obvious he's bluffing. It may be obvious against your typical opponents
yeah,
that the player has to have it or can't have it or whatever, but it's not. I travel all over the country, so I see that kind of cognitive bias all the time. That like the players I'm used to would never take that line as a bluff.
yeah,
Like, okay, then you shouldn't call down if you can only beat a bluff. But I've seen people take that line and turn over, six high or whatever. Um, and then I always have to take into account like how different are they playing because it's me instead of someone else.
yeah,
Um, I would love to like go play a bracelet event in disguise, not because I want to be tricky, but I just want to see is it as different as I think it might be
it is. It definitely
in
is.
terms of like how people play at me. Do they
Oh,
call less, raise more, whatever? I would love to see how it is different. I mean, like in your case, like I'm older than you, but it's not like I'm massively older.
yeah,
So if we looked the same, people might perceive us similarly until they get to know us. Except they might go, "Oh, you're Asian. Like those guys are either wild, crazy gamblers or really tight." Like
conservative. Yeah,
people tend to put Asian players at one extreme or the other in that regard. Um, Whereas like the middle-aged white guy doesn't get labeled as he's got to be one extreme or the other so much.
yeah,
But it would be fun just to try it out, and it's a shame you can't.
yeah.
I mean, and I wouldn't be doing it because like, oh, I want to like fool you, take advantage of you. It's like to some extent, like, how am I taking advantage of you? Like, I don't know anything about your game. If we just, at least most of the people I sit down day one of the main event, very seldom do I like, oh yeah, here's someone I really know.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's a bunch of people I haven't played with before. So it'd be like, it's not like I have secret knowledge. Like, ooh, I know how you play, but now because I'm in disguise, you don't know how I play.
It's not that. It's just like, for me when I started playing on camera, one, I realized the audience can't see everything that's going on. They can't feel like the player history. So like, once they saw me making moves on camera,
Yeah.
just I got called like really light, and to a point where just like I'm just so lazy. I don't like playing, no limit live. Like it'd be a four flush. I just like take my time, then move all in. I get snap called. There's one on camera. I get snap called by one pair on a four flush. I'm just like I
Yeah.
reviewed it. I'm just like I did not show anything, so it had to be
Yeah.
but I never used to.
Well, like, yeah. I mean, I get some pretty. I mean, and I have been called down in spots where it's just like I'm bluffing and I still win.
Oh,
It's kind of like, well, this is a great spot to bluff, and it's like even though I try not to bluff very often because I tend to get called light, I call and the player's just like, well, like they're talking it out loud, like you man, like I said, four flush and this, like this is a great spot to bluff, and then they said they call you and you're like, well, I am bluffing, and it's like, oh wait, your pair of sixes beat their pair of fives or something, and like, yeah, I paired my six on the flop, but it got worse and worse with all those hearts. So I decided to turn it into a bluff, and then like, oh, you called me with pocket fives.
one minor experiment you could do, which I still do, is like when you play online at a new site or whatever, you obviously have a new name. But if you're a reg and they see your name every damn day, they're gonna know stuff about you.
Yeah.
Like the HUDs will pick up stuff, but when you're a new name, you can just get away with a lot of old school tricks, and then if they know it's you, can't get away with that stuff anymore.
Well, like I said, but it's got to be a player pool that's small enough they can know you.
I think in
I
online,
mean, that's
even in small stakes now, you see a lot of repeat names.
yeah, that may be true. I mean, I've been playing on a site that's small, so everyone will get to know everyone. But
Yep.
Poker Stars back in the day,
Oh man,
unless you were playing one of the
like the
less
biggest.
common games, like I tended to play the cash games that were not Hold'em in Omaha.
Hmm.
So I was playing the draw games and the stud games and stuff like that. And you're playing 30, 60, 75, 150, or now you are seeing a lot of the same names. But
Yeah.
yeah, if I had jumped into the 50-cent dollar blind no limit cash
Oh
games,
no,
then it would have been like,
wide open.
yeah, I would have to be using some kind of HUD that was taking advantage of like pooled data from all the other
Right.
HUD users.
Yeah, you could buy those
And
databases.
well, I've never even used a HUD because I just don't play Hold'em online. I the only Hold'em I play online is tournaments, and that information isn't very useful because now it's like, well, maybe the guy overall plays tight, but that doesn't. Was he going to still be playing tight now when he's the big stack at the table? Like, can I trust the HUD numbers? Um, so it's just not something I've ever bothered to do, and I don't know of any HUDs for triple draw and you know stud
there,
high low.
there were for stud. I mean, one of the things that people are so solver crazy now, but I don't know what you studied for seven card stud. There was a book by Omar Constantine. I think it was a PhD as well, and he had a lot of numbers. So just through those numbers and graphs, you can extrapolate like a lot of stuff back then.
I'm not familiar with them, but I also don't get really any opportunities to play stud either anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
the game of commerce died a couple years ago, like 2017 or 18. There used to be 1 or 200 like 6 days a week.
yeah. I mean, my main cash game at Foxwoods before I won the main event was a 75-150 mix game, but they were only allowed to deal from the horse selection those 5 games, and it was almost always the O and the E, and then usually either the H or the S. And I don't remember ever seeing Raz at all in the mix. So it was usually 3 or 4 of the HOSE games, and then after I won the main event and I was playing mixed games, in Vegas and LA and other parts of the country, then it was triple draw and Badoogie were always part of the mix, and then we started getting all the other things like the Badusi and Badesi and Razdoogie and all those things started getting added. You
Yeah.
can love me or hate me but I'm essentially the guy that got Dramaha into the U.S.
Oh, really? Nice. I just like new
I,
games
uh,
in general.
I,
It's yeah, go ahead. Oh, it's just tough because like obviously televised poker is just like no limits, just about the only watchable form.
Yeah.
And then all these
Yeah, no,
games are really
it's
fun.
tough.
Yeah,
Well, you could certainly, you could put Limit Hold'em on Live at the Bike, but
we do. It's
there's
hard.
going to be a lot more stuff that is like hard to explain quickly to an audience as to like, well, no, like this player doesn't seem to have much, but this is still a good spot to check raise or whatever, and it's not just a pure bluff and da 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 da. Da. It's like, and it's kind of like, and if they don't check raise occasionally with a hand this bad, then they're going to lose the effectiveness of their check raising. It's not going to get paid off enough or whatever, and
What I
so
do,
it's you know
yeah, for the
go
alternative
ahead.
games, I consider them alternative games for like when I commentate like Limit Hold'em, PLO, mixed games.
Yeah,
Like I try to translate it to the audience as much in no limit terms as possible, and just explain the
yeah.
differences between No Limit Hold'em and how it's different from the other games. So I try. I mean, it's
Well,
just really really tough.
yeah. Well, it's like calling down because you think the person might be bluffing. You're not calling down with like Jack High and no limit, because now it's like, well, you call the turn bet and now the river bet, and when you add those two calls versus what you can win, it's like the ratio isn't very good. But in limit
Right.
hold'em, maybe the pot already swollen way up. Like calling those two big bets, you might still be getting 5-1, even 10 to
Even
1.
more. Yeah.
So now it's kind of like, well, part of their range would be like some straight draws around that 5 and 7 on the flop, and that's why I'm calling down with Jack High, because they could be barreling with 6-8 or 4-6 or something like that. Um, and my Jack High beats those. But I don't want to raise, because then if they actually have something, I'm just going to end up losing more money. So that might be a correct analysis in some spots, but it probably would be a bad call down and hold them, and no limit
No
hold them.
limit.
I mean,
Yeah. So let's see. So it seems like you stopped your patent attorney career at Pfizer after you won the main. Is that what happened?
oh yeah. Well, I mean, I went back to. I mean, I won on a Friday. It was the holiday weekend. I always get them backwards between Labor Day. Which one's in the spring? Memorial Day and Labor Day. I always get them mixed up. But it was that weekend, so I was back at work on Tuesday, and didn't turn in my resignation for a couple of weeks. But I basically knew I was leaving, and I mean, PokerStars was offering me, quite a bit more money to represent them.
Hmm.
And so that's why, like, my advice we discussed earlier about, like, don't quit your job. It's like, well, but it's different here. It's like, I can, if I break even at the tables, I'm going to make like double the money or more. So then that's a big, big difference when you're going to have that extra income. And you don't just have to, like, keep running good or keep playing good and have the games remain good and so on. That's not an issue anymore. Um, so that's a pretty unique spot that no one's really going to be offered. Even if you win the main event next summer, you're probably not going to have a site offering you, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to represent them.
Right.
That's very unlikely that you're going to be offered that kind of money. You might get some kind of deal, but it isn't going to be much. And it might be quite a bit less than what your normal job paid if you weren't a full-time poker player. So, very different scenario. Like, if it had happened now, I probably would have quit working for Pfizer, but then I would have just opened a solo practice out of my house, and then I could play poker part time. I
Whenever.
could do
Yeah.
patent work part time, and even now, actually, I'm doing some part time patent work just because I have time to kill. Even before COVID, so it's not even that issue that I can't travel anymore. But it's once my daughter left the house and went to college, which she's now a college graduate, even, it's like now when I'm home from these trips, I still have extra time. So I've, let old friends know from that era, like, hey, if you need someone to write a patent application, I can do it. It's still, it's not like it's horrible work. It's like, by definition, if I'm writing a patent application for you, that means you have something that's new and inventive. Because if it isn't, my advice to you should be, don't waste your money. There you go. So that's what I should be telling you if you come up with something, to me and say, here, I want to get a patent on this. And I'm just like, no, no, look, I can find that stuff mentioned out in the public domain right and left. I should be telling you, don't waste your money, because you're not going to get the patent.
Yeah.
So that means, by definition, we have something that's brand new, never been done before, and I get to learn all about it and write it and describe it and try to help you protect it. And then we file it, and eventually you get the document like you just showed us. So I've done some of those in the last few years, and so I still do a little bit of that. Not a lot. I'm not a lawyer anymore, but I'm still a patent agent. Because what happened to the lawyer thing is just, I quit paying my annual dues to the state bar, and they kick you out for that. So if I want to pay them for like 16 years of back dues and make up 16 years of the continuing legal education requirement, then I could be a lawyer again.
Practicing, yeah.
But that's so many hours. It's like, the money was one thing, but then I saw the hours, like, oh shoot, like I got to do like 400 hours of CLE. I was like, you know what? I think I could probably spend less than 100 hours studying and go pass the bar exam again. And then I wouldn't have to do any of that. I wouldn't have to pay the money or do the CLE. I just have to pass the bar exam. So if I do decide to become a lawyer again, I'll just spend a few months studying, pass the bar, be a lawyer again. But you don't have to do any of that stuff to keep your status with the patent office. So I'm still a patent agent. So I cannot give you legal advice per se, but I can represent you before the patent office, which means not only can I draft that document, but I can advise you, well, we should do this, do that, with respect to getting you a patent. When you say, hey, give me some advice, I want to license this to this company, and I'm like, well, that I shouldn't do, because now that might be considered legal advice, and I could get in trouble with the state bar. But when we're just talking about getting you a patent and doing the process between you and the patent office, that I can still legally do. So that's what I've been doing for people, is they'll come to me, I'll write the application, file it, and and I can help with all that. But so that's what I've been doing in COVID too. I haven't been doing much of that, but that's a little bit of work. I do Zoom lessons with students. I've been writing books number 2 and 3, and playing some online poker.
So for the patent stuff, is it mostly just chemistry, biochemistry for the pharmaceutical industry, or is it beyond that?
It's actually been gaming. It's been poker related stuff, or gaming related stuff, where people are like, hey, we have a game type thing. Like one of them was one that I wrote that I'm a co-inventor on with Tom Schneider several years ago. So you'll see that you can go find that patent if you care. That was going to be huge until Black Friday. Killed us, because this was going to be a way to essentially avoid sports betting laws and let you put money on people who are playing online poker. So you remember how popular it was for people to sweat, the big online games with,
the real
Tom, Dwan, and Gus, and all those guys. Well, now, and people would be on the forums debating over who was really the better player. Well, our invention was letting you basically back the player. So you could come, if this was, let's say PokerStars had bought this patent from us or licensed it from us. Well, now you would go on, or it probably would have been Full Tilt, because that's where most of those games were back then. So now here are Gus and Tom playing heads up, no limit hold'em with blinds of 1,000, 2,000. And you would say you pick, I don't know, who do you want to pick? Tom or Gus?
I don't want to comment this on air.
Okay. I'm gonna randomly give one of us Tom and one of us Gus, okay? So neither of us really picked them, but we flip a coin here, and so
Sure.
you get Tom, and
Okay.
you say you want Tom to play for you, but instead of 1,000, 2,000, you want it to be $1, $2. And I have over here on the software said I want Gus to play for me at $1, $2. So now the software matches us up, creates this shadow or ghost table, and maybe it's like, so
And use
here's
escrow.
Gus's avatar and my avatar sitting next to each other, and then here's you and Tom Dwan sitting next to each other,
Yeah.
and we get dealt the same cards, and you and I don't actually actively play.
Right.
We're just making, they make the decisions for us.
Yeah.
But when one of them bets 10,000, one of us is betting 10
Hmm.
because we're playing at 1/1000th of the stake. And so now they're playing for us, and the site, of course, can take some rake out of our game.
Yeah.
And
So
I
they,
think that might have been hugely popular.
I think it would be. Did they have to? I mean, one of the issues would be escrowing money, right? And there's like, the same problems with
Well, this
online
is just,
gambling
you're
sites.
on a site. You're just on a site. Like, if you don't have money in your account, you can't play.
Right, but I mean,
And
say
anyway,
Tom Dwan runs up like 10 buy-ins, and then and you have Gus Hansen, but you don't have 10 buy-ins.
well, then that's, I mean, the site's going to kick me out and close our derivative table if I don't have the money to cover it. So
Okay,
if we
yeah,
sit down and based on their starting buy-ins, like you and
yeah,
I have each put $100 on the table,
yeah,
if that's all I have in my account, then if Gus reloads, then our game is just going to have to end because
right,
I don't have the funds to match his reload. And
yeah,
he's obviously going to play different because he's got 100 blinds, and on our table, I've only now got 30 blinds.
hmm,
And I don't have the funds to reload. And that would be the kind of thing that we had in the patent was like, oh, am I going to automatically reload if I have funds? Do I
hmm,
have to wait for a second and click yes? You know, all these different things. And I think it would have been huge because people were sweating those high
oh
stakes
yeah,
games in
absolutely,
huge numbers. And so it doesn't even have to be $1. It could be one penny, two penny. And then the site could still take a little bit of rake off of our game. And so now instead of just having thousands of people watch, you could have thousands watching and hundreds of them playing derivative games at the same time, making money for the site. So, we thought it was going to be huge, and then Black Friday hit, like right about the same time we were getting our patent. So, like, there goes that plan to
you
license
abandoned
that
it.
to. No, 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 it's still there, but
Hmm.
it's a U.S. patent because it's a this kind of stuff is what they call business methods patents, and those are generally only patentable in the U.S. So I talked to some experts, friends of mine from like Europe and stuff from back in the day, and they, yeah, like you're not going to be able to get this in Europe. You're not going to be able to get this in Japan, Australia, Canada, because most countries do not allow business method patents at all. So it's U.S. only, and there's no U.S. facing site that has big games like this. So if someone in Europe wants to do this, there's nothing we can do to stop them from copying this idea, really.
Uh oh, this is public now. Go ahead.
Well, no, but I mean, it already was. It's on the
Yeah.
U.S. Patent Office website if anyone cared.
Right.
Um, so it's not like I'm giving away some secret.
Yeah.
I might be bringing it to their attention and they hadn't thought of it before. But to be honest, I'd be like, yeah, make it a big hit in Europe. And then when we get bigger online poker back in America, maybe our patent will still have some years left and you'll pay me so you can do it here.
Yeah.
It might still make Tom and I some money somehow. But it's, we were confident we were going to sell this or license it for many millions of dollars. And then it was like, yep, nothing, gone.
Yeah, that's always the thing. Whether you do things with a made hand or you're on a draw.
Yeah. Actually, I should double check. Like, I've relocated. I wonder they could have sent a notice to my old house, and I'd have to because you do have to pay maintenance fees
Hmm.
every few years to keep your patent alive. You don't just automatically get the whole 20 years. You got to pay some fees at a couple
Of
of
course.
spots. I should double check, make sure they haven't like sent me something in the mail that I didn't get. But it's still, it's a shame. It's another one of those things of Black Friday, and then the whole thing is so stupid.
Yeah.
I'm confident that online poker is totally legal as far as federal U.S. federal law is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of a bad beat that I wasn't like single when I won the main event. Because if I didn't have a wife and a daughter, my proposal to Isai Scheinberg, the owner of PokerStars, would have
Yep.
been, let's get a test case. You will invest in my company that is going to be an online poker site in the US that I will run
Mm.
in the US so that I get arrested. And then I am not going to back out or settle or any of that crap. We will make sure that there's no legitimate charges they can make other than running an online poker site.
Mm-hmm.
None of this money laundering crap that happened with Black Friday and or none of, like, there's no such allegation that could stick.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to take you at your word that if I go to jail over this,
You'll
that
pay
when I
them.
get out of jail, you're going to like hire me as a consultant and pay me really well for having taken one for the team,
Right.
so to speak. And so for the right amount of money, I'd have been willing to do that. But not when I got a wife and daughter who could
Right.
be sitting there, suffering as a result.
Sure.
Because I don't think they could have won. I'm not even sure if they would have gone to trial. Once it was clear they can't scare me into settling, it's like, if he doesn't lose at trial, then it's wide open, nothing we can do to stop it. And I don't think they would want to risk that. So they might have just decided to like do something like, oh shoot, we forgot to meet some deadline. The case is now dismissed with prejudice. Oh no. But it doesn't stop us from like coming after the next person. And that would have been the only bad outcome actually for PokerStars. It'd be like, no, we still can't. We're still going to be worried they're going to come after us.
Yeah, that's no good.
But we probably could have gotten a good test case, and they might have gone to trial with it. I don't know.
So there's a
But I'd have
story.
been willing to risk it for a big enough promise of payday.
So on Wikipedia, so
Sorry, I'm
just
missing out on.
is it choppy?
Now I've got a notice here that says your internet connection is unstable. Just
Yeah.
popped up. So I don't know if that's you or me, but
I think it's your end, but like
if it is me, I'm
it's a
sorry.
little choppy. No problem. I mean, we'll just I'll answer in the comments below if
Just-
anybody has any questions.
Just start over with the question though, because I didn't really hear it.
So I was even asked this by somebody I knew yesterday, which is there was an attempted robbery on you December 20th, 2004, I guess, and you said
Yeah.
some of the stuff was like some of the facts were a little off, or
Well, just when the email you sent me said something about a karate chop. There was no karate chop. I mean, nothing heroic per se. But yeah, I was at the Bellagio for is that the Five Diamond? I think is in December typically.
yeah,
So I was there for that tournament, and I had been knocked out on like day one or day two or something. I was still there for a few nights, and I had just been playing like some bigger cash games. Like we had 400, 800 mixed games going, stuff like that. And I had also gotten a whole lot of flags, the 5K chips,
mm,
because back then we thought when you traveled overseas that you didn't have to declare those. Like I even knew a player who had an opinion from his lawyer explaining that like he did not have to declare those entering or leaving the US because they have no cash value anywhere outside the Bellagio. So that was what we firmly believed, even though later the Treasury said no, these count, you must declare them. But at the time, that opinion letter from the Treasury wasn't out there, so I had like 160,000 in Bellagio chips, and it was my last night. And every night I had gone from the poker room to the main cage and put my money in the box, but I was going to be waking up early the next morning to go and play some golf, and then checking into the Union Plaza because we were filming a TV poker thing for the Game Show Network. And so instead of going to the box late at night and dropping off my money, I went to the box and took it all out And these two guys that apparently were known to hang around the poker room had been targeting me. And so when I got off the elevator, there's like three wings, you know, like you get off the elevator, like, oh, you can go straight ahead a bunch of rooms, you can turn right or left. And I turn the corner, and here's this guy walking ahead of me, like 20 feet ahead of me. And I am in the last door on the right. And he goes up to the second to the last door, fishes around in his pocket, and then starts knocking on the door and yelling out some woman's name, you know, oh, Helen, I forgot my key, open the door. And so you don't think anything of it. And I come up next to him, go to unlock my door, and just as I'm starting to open my door, there's all of a sudden a third person that I don't know where they came from. I'm guessing they were in the stairwell for the fire, fire stairwell thing, that they must have been in there without letting the door close behind them or something. And this person has now grabbed me from behind, and the guy next to me has jumped in and is helping, and they're trying to push me in the room. I pushed all of us back out in the hallway and knocked them off of me, kind of like when a basketball player with a rebound, you know, how they like, you know, so I'm like throwing them off of me. And now I'm staring at them, and the guy knocking on the door was a smaller guy, and he's right in front of me. And the end of the hallway is behind him a few feet. And the other guy who had grabbed me from behind is a much bigger guy. And when I got, I'm sorry, they were reversed, but in any event, now the little guy, he had a little shopping bag, like those paper bags with little twisted paper handles, like you get at a nicer store. And he reaches in, pulls out a gun. And the whole time I've been yelling for help. Like as soon as they grab me, I've been yelling for help and telling people to call you, like call security, you know, and screaming this out as loud as I can. And now I see the gun and I stop. And I don't know for sure how much time went by, but it was probably only about a second. But in that second, what went through my mind was like, they've got a gun. They're not just saying, give us your money. They're trying to get me in my room, which means they're going to tie me up. I've seen their faces. They might decide, we got to kill him so he can't identify us. And if I'm all tied up and they decide to kill me, 100% I'm going to be dead. But if I keep fighting out here, even if he shoots me, I've got a reasonable chance of survival. Because if they do shoot, they will probably run. So I'm thinking all that. I start yelling again. The big guy tries to grab me. I shove into him, knock him on the ground real hard. Immediately go, that was a mistake. Like, that's what, I didn't say anything, but like my thought was like, that I should have like grabbed onto him so his friend doesn't want to shoot me. So I've knocked him down, and I look over expecting to see a gun pointed at me about to shoot, and he's not there. And here's the hallway behind him. He's not there, and so apparently when I'm knocking this guy down, he's given up. He's now running down the hall. And his friend gets up, and he's like limping down the hall after him. I think I twisted his ankle or something. And the adrenaline really kicked in at that moment, because I took maybe 2 steps after them, and I started yelling out like, I'm gonna kill you motherfuckers. And then I was like, wait a second, you don't want to catch up to these guys, because even if you could beat them up, they got a gun.
Yeah.
And now I see 2 security guards running up the hallway towards us. So I yelled out like, they've got a gun, they're trying to rob me.
Yeah.
And the security guards let them run by, because that's what they were supposed to do. And they're on their little radio on their shoulder here and calling ahead to security. And so they ended up having these guys on camera, you know, in the elevator lobby, elevator, downstairs, through the casino, into the Self Park, and, you know, got pictures of the car and the license plate as they were leaving, but they got away before the police could show up. But I was told that, like we don't have weapons here at security. Like, no one in Bellagio security has a weapon, or at least, you know, no firearms, at least. I don't know if they have stun guns or anything, to be honest, but they don't have guns per se. And that's what these guys are supposed to do. Like, if a bad guy's just trying to run away, you let him run away, and you are trained to like look at them so you can identify them, and look for the tattoos and things to really differentiate them from some other random person. So they've been trained to do all those things, but not, we're not supposed to like go grab them and try to detain them physically or anything. It's only supposed to get physical. Like if you and I were like in an argument in the casino and one of us is attacking the other, then they're supposed to maybe physically try to stop the attacker because he's about to hurt the other person who's a guest. But if I'm just trying to run away, they're not supposed to do anything about it. And so these guys got recognized a few months later in San Diego, and police brought them, caught them, extradited them, and they went to jail.
Wow. Real life.
So, I mean, in hindsight, it was all good because I didn't get hurt. They didn't get anything. And I learned that, I'd never been in a spot like that before in my life. And I learned that, like, hey, even in like a spot like this, I was still like thinking rationally. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't, becoming unable to function. And that's just something that happens to a lot of people. It's not that there's something wrong with you if that happens. It's fairly normal. But in my case, it turns out like, nope, I can still keep thinking my best, doing my best. Doesn't mean I'm going to get it right and always make the best choice, but at least I was doing the best I could in that amount of time. And I was told by people after, like experts in security, like you were smart not to go let them like go tie you up.
Room. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean the way they refer to it is like the first crime scene was in the hall, the second crime scene would have been in the room, and they said people die in the second crime scene way more often than in the first.
Right.
So in all the movies where someone like the van pulls up and they point a gun at you and they say get in,
yeah,
these people would like, if that was me, I'm never getting in.
Sure.
Like shoot me here on the street if that's what you're going to do, but I am not getting in that van because you're pointing a gun at me.
Life advice, guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we all hope no one ever has to deal with that, but that's
Sure.
the point, that if they're ever going to kill you, they'll be less likely to, it's like they're trying to kidnap you for some reason. Maybe they want to ransom you, whatever. If we just shoot you here on the street, now we've committed a crime with zero chance of making any money. So we're not trying to kill you here. If we were trying to kill you, we wouldn't tell you to get in. We would just shoot you right there. So it might not go well, but on average, it's like poker. It's like, it's not what's guaranteed to be the best. If we all knew our aces were going to get cracked, we would have folded pre-flop. But, you don't know what's coming.
Right.
So you make the decision in the moment that looks like that will, on average, yield the best result. And that's what we're talking about here, is the same kind of thing, that what decision on average will get the best result. And so the experts have told me, don't go to the second crime scene if you can possibly avoid it, because things will on average be worse.
So you have lobbied extensively to have poker regulated and classified as a game of skill after the passage of the UIGEA in 2006. As part of this effort, you're currently a member of the board of directors of the Poker Players Alliance?
Well, no, because that's been disbanded a few years ago.
Oh, okay. But are you still trying to lobby for this stuff?
I mean, I still do what I can, but there just isn't much to be done. It's just one of those things. It's like you really can't win. Like we had a case in Virginia back when I was with the PPA, and so this guy wanted to open a poker room, and so he had set up a scenario where he could get himself in court without having to risk going to jail. And now we're getting a trial on the thing. And so the PPA was helping him, and there was a university math professor who had done a thorough review of a database of hands that Full Tilt had provided, like, I don't remember the number, 100 million hands or something. And he was able to draw several conclusions. And one of the big ones that really lends a lot of support to poker being a game of skill was that it was something like about 70% of the pots were won without showdown, which means the winner didn't have to have anything. They may have had the best hand, much of the time, but certainly at least some of the time they didn't. And if you could win 70% of the pots without showdown, then certainly that means there must be some skill involved for you to know when you should try to take the pot with nothing.
Right.
So he had that and some other things that he talked about on the stand. I also, talked more about live poker, and it was funny because like the city side of this case was being handled by like a city prosecutor guy. Like I said, this was really a civil case, not a criminal one, because the guy hadn't done anything illegal yet. He was able to set up the scenario where it's like he was denied a license or something, and he's now appealing it. And so we were able to get it to where the only issue was, is poker a game of skill, and therefore not covered by the Virginia anti-gambling law. The only question, he didn't ask anything of the professor, and all he asked me was, if I go to a poker game, or if I go to any legal poker room anywhere in the world, am I allowed to go in, play one hand of poker, and then quit? And I was like, yeah. I mean, any game I've played in a public room, you could go. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen anyone do it, but yes, you could go in, sit down at a cash game, get dealt in for one hand, and then quit at the end of the hand. And that was it. That's all he asked. And then basically when the judge gave his ruling, it was essentially like, wow, you, the professor, and you, the poker pro, have convinced me that in the long run, poker is a game of skill. But since you don't have to play for the long run, since you could just play one hand and that luck would dominate in one hand, poker is therefore still illegal gambling under the Virginia statute. Okay. So that was the basis of his ruling, was that even though there wasn't luck in the long run, there was luck in the short run. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to stand up in court and just say to him, like, are you a fucking idiot? Like, if we reduced golf to the short run, instead of 4 hours or so for a round of golf, we're going to make it 1 minute.
Or one
so that
shot.
Means Tiger Woods I'm going to take on Tiger Woods, and it's going to be like a 20-foot putt, and that's the whole game. Well, obviously, I am sometimes going to make the putt, and he is sometimes going to miss the putt, which means I will sometimes win in this 1 minute golf match. So does that mean that it's a game of luck because the better player doesn't win every time? That's the only difference. The only difference between, like, let's say golf and poker. If you and I are relatively closely matched in either one of these, it will take quite a while to determine based on results which of us is better. But if one of us is a lot better than the other, it still will probably take longer in poker to determine who is better. So if you took the total beginner versus the pro in poker, it's still, you might have to have them play for 30 minutes before the results would prove who's better. It might even take a couple hours. In golf, it would, the better, like Tiger he would even occasionally lose a hole of golf to me. Like if we played 15 minutes, one hole. Because again, I get an occasional birdie. I certainly get several pars per round. He does not birdie or par every hole. So even in a slightly longer match, he would occasionally lose to me. But if we played for 2 hours, there's zero doubt he would win every time. If I ever beat him in a 2-hour match, it would have to mean that he got injured and couldn't finish. That's the only way I could beat him over 9 holes. And if you took someone who was comparable to my golf level at poker, like a bogey golfer, and you had him play against a top pro, it might take a day or two to mathematically prove based on the results alone who was better. But it still would happen. So I just wanted to stand up and tell the judge, you're an idiot. You don't have a clue what you're talking about. And it was very obvious, though. It's like the whole thing was basically agreed to in advance. Like this judge he did not want to be the guy that had to go to the country club, let's say, that weekend and have everyone say like, what the hell, dude, you just let them open the poker room, it's going to ruin our community. He didn't want to listen to that kind of crap from people, who were against it. And so he came up with a reason that he could justify rather than making an actual legitimate ruling. So I don't remember that judge's name, but fuck you.
Oh man. Um, so you have a book out, Fossil Man's Winning Tournament Strategies, published by D&B Poker. It came out June 2019. What's this book about?
It is, I hope, the Bible for tournament poker. So I cover all the major aspects. I'm trying to emulate something like the theory of poker in the sense that I am going to teach you all the concepts you need to become a great player when it comes to tournament poker. So here's the chapter on continuation betting. So I'm going to talk about, here's why you should do it and when you should do it, and the parameters that will tell you when to and when not to. Here's the chapter on slow playing. Again, the good, the bad, and how you should, the concepts you should use to determine when to slow play or not. Stack size strategy. Simple things like, hey, if you're down to like 10, 12 big blinds or less, you should either fold or go all in. Probably nothing else. Here's maybe an exception or two that's going to come up every now and then. And here's how to correctly play your stack size when it's more than 12 but less than 20 big blinds. This should be your dominant strategy doing these things, and so on. So it's over 40 chapters long, covering all these different topics. And I think, anyone who already just understands the rules of Hold'em can read this book and become a great tournament player. But I shouldn't say just read it. You got to do more than read it. You got to read it, study it, and learn how to correctly apply the information. But one thing I am have been known for since I was a kid even, is I'm really good at explaining things to people. When I was in college at my fraternity, I literally would have guys lined up outside my room waiting their turn to get help with their homework. Because even though there was pretty much every other person in the fraternity might be able to help them theoretically, it was like, no, because when Greg does it, I understand. This is an engineering school, so almost everyone was in engineering. I mean, everyone in my fraternity was an engineering major. In fact, I was the only one who wasn't because I was chemical. But still, like, we all took physics. So everyone took physics 1 and physics 2. So if you had an issue with physics and the laws of motion, it was like, Greg took that class. Like, that's a sophomore year class. So, Greg already took that. So you could have gone to everyone else who was like a senior, a junior, or, had taken that class already as a sophomore, and they have taken it, passed it, they could theoretically help you. But I would have half a dozen guys waiting their turn to get help from me. So I'm very good at explaining things in a way that people understand. And so hopefully that is reflected in the book. And I haven't gotten any bad feedback on it yet.
Okay, well, we'll post the link down below. So if you guys are curious, Greg Raymer, 2004 main event champion. Yep. If you want to win the main event, you got to read this book. At least if you get heads up with Greg Raymer.
Well, if you get heads up with me, you want to wait out for another book I'm working on.
Oh, okay.
Like I do my live seminars, though obviously not anymore with COVID. But when I do these group seminars, we would have like the morning session, which would be me lecturing, and also, answering questions and stuff. And that's kind of the first book, so to speak. Here are all the kinds of topics I might have covered in the morning. We don't have time for everything that's in the book, but I'm discussing those kinds of issues. And then the afternoon, I will be the dealer, and the students will play against each other. And at the end of each hand, I will then give you feedback and critique your play. So be like, okay, Wayne, why did you call his turn bet? What was your plan? What were you thinking?
Because I'm a hero.
And then, okay, that's a good reason to call. Did you consider this as a good reason to fold, or these good reasons to raise, et cetera, et cetera? So we'll do that kind of feedback on the hand and discuss, what are those like reasons that we talked about this morning that would guide that decision. And so I thought, well, that's will be my next book. Is I'll do this book of, I'll go back through all these different hands I've played over the years. So like I reviewed that DVD for the '04 main event. I had been posting hands for years on Share My Pair because I'm one of their pros. So I pulled out all the interesting hands from there. And then I won another HPT this January. They're one at Ameristar East Chicago, and that's a live stream. And so you can go watch it on YouTube. So it's like, oh, I can pull those hands. And then it was like, wow, like there was over 50 hands of heads up. So now this second book has become 2 books. So the first of these 2 books I'll discuss 50, 60 hands that are all shorthanded full table tournament scenarios that I've played. But then I've decided to take all the heads up hands and make that a book of its own. And I'm writing introductory chapters of heads up strategy. So there I actually do have some charts. Kind of like, hey, if you're going to take a very aggressive approach, then when you're on the button first to act, like raise with these hands and fold those hands and so on. And, and if you're the big blind, here's a couple charts. Like if it's someone who's loose aggressive on the button, defend with these hands. And these are ones to call with. These are ones to 3-bet with. So there's a little bit more of a chart approach there. But then I do make it clear, like, hey, like here's like a more aggressive approach. Here's a more passive approach. And there's a big difference between those 2 charts. And you need to figure out, are you here, there, or somewhere in the middle, given this opponent and what you've seen from them so far.
Wow. Okay. Well.
So if you're going to play me heads up, you should wait till then, and my heads up record is really good. Like
I believe it.
I am something like in a multi-table tournament, I've gotten to heads up and lost only like twice ever.
Out of how many times?
Out of like 20 or so. I mean, even when I get to a final table, I have a win rate. Once I make the final table, I've won like over a third of them. So I tend to do well at final tables. I think I'm really good at like leveraging all those little dynamics that happen and constantly change, and kind of knowing when each player is going to loosen up or tighten up, stuff like that.
There's all really underrated things that go on in poker in general.
Well, they're hard to teach, and sometimes I think you've really loosened up, and so I call you down light, and then I'm wrong, or at least I lose. You show me the nuts, but even then, it's like, well, was I wrong, or would he have done the same thing with all these worse hands that I would have beaten, and he just happened to be at the top of his range this time? Even then, it's hard to know that I was wrong as opposed to unfortunate, so to speak. Or it could just be I was wrong and you would not have put all those chips at risk without the nuts or something close to it. And I was just completely mistaken, and I'm willing to accept that. And I've made those mistakes for sure. But it's still, it's hard to teach those things of like how to tell when someone's all of a sudden going to tighten up, loosen up. And some of it's just a live play thing. Like I see a guy who's folded a few times to someone, and then that someone they folded to gets to showdown and turns over a bluff, and you just see the look on their face like, oh man, I've been getting run over. And you're just like, do not try to bluff this guy anytime soon, because he is not in a mood to fold. So it is just like paying attention to like noticing that little look on his face. Like, and he wasn't even in that hand, so there's a good chance you're not going to catch it. But if you do catch it, take advantage, like, okay, don't try to bluff him right now. He is a lot more likely to call. But if you have a good hand, value bet, go for 3 streets of value instead of 2, and maybe size your bets larger because you think he's more likely to pay you off. Stuff like that. And, so obviously you can't teach all these things perfectly, but I'll do my best. in these books by explaining how I played all these hands, and a lot of it because I'm already in the editing stage, so I've done all the initial drafts, and a lot of it is me saying how bad I played that hand 12 years ago.
We all have
Or
that.
especially those hands from the main event. I'm just like, wow, that was like really bad bet sizing. I should have bet more. I should have bet less. Um, or this would have been a good spot to not see bet, and I see bet anyways. So there's plenty of times where I'm criticizing my own play. Um, it's not like I'm just saying, look at all these hands I played perfect and all my different opponents who played bad. It's like, no. I played a lot of those hands really bad. Even if maybe I didn't play them so bad for 2005.
Yeah.
But nowadays we would say that's really
It's
bad.
different, yeah.
But some of them I played bad no matter when. It was bad for 05 and it's worse now.
There's definitely some, like that. But, I always say that you should have multiple lines in your arsenal and then you just like micromanage. And sometimes there are extremely rare, unique circumstances that come up and maybe
Yeah. What are you going to do?
So I had reached out to, or I think Scott or Clark reached out and said you were part of his group to come on Live at the Bike. Did he ever reach out to you about that?
Well, yeah, we talked about doing it, and COVID hit,
Yeah.
so everything got canceled. And he was going to he was helping to arrange a game for your stream that would be a Big O game instead of Hold'em.
Would you be up for playing Hold'em, or are you just?
No, I will. It's just, if I'm at a poker room with lots of selection available, or if I'm online with lots of selection, I'm very rarely going to pick the no limit Hold'em cash game.
Yeah, that's what I tell people too.
I might, but I mean, the reason I mentioned Dramaha earlier, like I learned that because I forget where I was. It was someplace in Florida, and I'm out of the tournament, and it's like all the cash games are no limit Hold'em, and I go to the floor and I'm like, let's start an interest list for just 4-8 limit dealer's choice. And when people ask you about the game, say it's just, it's not a big game. It's $4, $8 limit. And when it's their turn, they'll pick a game, we'll play an orbit of their game, and they can pick any game you are allowed to deal, but they cannot pick Hold'em. Because if you want to play Hold'em, go to every other, there's like 30 other tables, like go to one of them if you want to play Hold'em.
Yeah.
But other than that, their only limit on choice is what you are allowed to deal. And a guy from Sweden wanted to play Sviten, which is the name of the game over there where it originated. And it's like Sviten, Sviten. So it's not a play on the name Sweden, even though it sounds similar. Mm-hmm. It's a different word. And I was like, what's that? And he explained it, and I'm like, well, that sounds great, but I can't imagine that's on the list of approved games. And he yells for the floor, tells the floor what the game is, and the floor is like, I mean, technically the ruling should have been no, but this floor was great. And I could just see the look on his face. It's just like, I happen to know there's no one from gaming here right now, and you guys are just having fun, and and the dealers don't know how to deal any of the games you're playing, which is why I was sitting in the one seat to help the dealers. And he's just like, yeah, no one cares. You're going to play one orbit of this game. I'm never going to hear of it again. Have your fun, whatever. You can play it. And it was great. We played the one orbit, and I'm like, this is a good game. And then the next summer, I was at the World Series playing like pot limit triple draw. And we were down to four-handed. And I'd been telling them about this great game I'd learned a few months ago that we should try it. And they were like, it sounds fun, but we don't want to add it, because if we add it to the mix, then we can't get rid of it unless everyone says yes. So I said, well, then let's not add it to the mix. Let's agree to add one orbit only. And then we don't play it again unless everyone agrees to add it.
Yeah. And
they're like, okay. So four-handed, we played the one orbit. And then we just kept playing it, and that's all we played. So no more triple draw. And those guys were all like local pros who lived in Vegas, and they introduced it to their home game at Panorama Towers where they lived, and it spread back into all the live games and all that. But we were playing it. They do pot limit in Sweden, and this was pot limit.
Wow.
And So now it's in all the live games, and then it was here in America that all the variations arose with like deuce to seven for the 5 card draw hand, and Badoogie for the 5 card draw hand, and High Doogie,
Yeah.
and everything else that's come up. But originally it was just this pot limit Swedish home game.
Yeah, they were running Dramaha High Limit, not Pot Limit, and then they ran the Deuce to Seven version, and then occasionally like, the Badoogie version. So yeah, it's wild stuff.
And it's and it was a great game. In that first game when we had switched from when we were playing pot limit instead of triple draw, it was like we play a hand where I've raised with aces, and the flop is 6-8 ace rainbow. So I've got the top set for the Omaha, and I got one pair of aces for draw.
Yeah.
And I bet, and two guys call me, and I draw three, and the dealer gives me king, 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 and then pairs the board.
Wow, easy game.
So I'm holding kings full of aces, and I have aces full. Like, I could chop with quads, but that was my only risk, and managed to get called by both of them on the turn and the river. So and it was like, okay, one guy had like the trips on the PLO, and the other guy had like two pair in his hand for the 5 card draw hand, and then I was like, aces full, kings full. What?
Yeah.
I have yet to see a hand that strong ever in that game.
There's a lot of blindsiding. Well, yeah, probably not like hand strength with hand strength, but like sometimes if you're dealt like a high straight and then you just like slam the board with the same high straight, it's that happens too. So.
Yeah, no, that's definitely. I mean, if you were asking me like, "Oh, Greg, what starting hand do you want?" I'd be like, "Let me have like a, probably like an ace high straight double suited. It's like ace queen of hearts, king jack of spades, and a 10 of diamonds or clubs." It'd be like, "Yeah, give me the straight. Give me this really good Omaha hand with a nut flush draw and a second nut flush draw and potential and all that." Or any made straight is a huge hand in that game. I mean, It's really hard for you to get scooped by one player. It's basically impossible for you to get scooped by one player. It's not impossible, but
it's not.
It's highly unlikely. I mean, but it's
Yeah, that's where a lot of PLO stuff comes out, because if you have the ace high straight, if there's a possible boat on the board, you usually have the nut boat, or at least like trips with the ace kicker, or the highest kicker possible. And high cards are better than low cards, guys, in poker. for the high.
Unless you're playing deuce to seven in the middle, then it's completely different world, and all that. But that was the main thing, though, is that it's a split pot game, and that's the big mistake. I think these were guys who were working pros. They only played poker for a living, and they specialized in mixed games. Like, it's not like these were Hold'em players only, because this was a pot limit triple draw game. And yet, when we switched to Dramaha, they were focusing most of their thoughts on the Omaha part.
Yeah.
So they were playing. So it would be things like you would bet pot on the flop, and a guy would call you, and he would have something like let's say if the board was 8 of hearts, 6 of hearts, 3 of diamonds, he'd have something like an 8 and a 3 and the ace of hearts. Not the 8 or the 3 of hearts, and he would keep the 8 and the 3 for the 2 pair on board, which it's top and bottom pair in 5-card Omaha. It's not a strong hand. And then, let's keep the ace of hearts, because then if I draw 2 and get a heart, I'll have the nut flush draw for Omaha. I'm like, so your 5-card draw hand is ace 8 3 of different suits. Like, that's a really bad 5-card draw hand, and your Omaha hand isn't that special. And so they would be doing silly things like that, where they're almost giving up the 5-card draw half of the pot. And it was like fantastic. Like, so I mean, even though it was like me and 3 pros until some other people sat down, I was still a huge money favorite, because they just weren't, even though they should have known better, they weren't playing. And it wasn't like I had experience on them. I played one orbit of 4-8 in Florida. That was my experience advantage over them. But they just weren't playing both halves at the same time, like you should with any split pot game.
Yeah. Pro tip for all the split pot games is if there's one side that's easier to lock up that side and then try to do the best you can for the other half.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's one thing, you deal me the full house in my hand, I'm still going to play it.
Yeah.
But I know that it's really hard for me to win the Omaha half
Yeah.
because I've taken all my own outs basically, and therefore, you know, I should know
Just
I'm
bing the
playing.
quads. Just bing the quads. I'm just
Well,
kidding. I'm kidding.
of course you could, I mean, or I could have aces full in my hand with two nut flush draws and make one of them or
Right.
whatever. But
Yeah.
normally, if you got dealt a full house in the first five cards,
You
it's
have
like, oh, I got
everything.
jacks full of sevens, and maybe I have one or two flush draws, but it's not the nuts. And so now you have to keep in mind that you're only going to scoop if you get everyone to fold,
Yeah.
probably. So do I keep a lot of people in so my half is more
Floats up.
profit, or
Yeah.
do I sense
Jam.
that I can jam and get everyone to fold and therefore scoop, by not having showdown? And those are just basic split pot concepts for any game. And that's why I love split pot games, because even some really good players do not seem to pay attention to those.
Okay. Well, that was a lot of great info. Do you have any final words for the audience?
Well, just thanks for listening in or watching. I'm not even sure if this is only audio or if this is audio and video when you
It's
present it.
both. It's both.
Yeah. So, well,
Yeah.
thanks for watching, and enjoying my hair since February. No haircut since February. So I don't think
Same.
it's ever. Even when I was young, I don't think it ever was this long. Um, but thanks for watching, and thank you for hosting me, Wayne. I appreciate it very much. And if people have questions or anything, you can get hold of me at fossilmanpoker.com, and I'm on Twitter at fossilman. And if you think you might want a little bit of help with your tournament game, then Fossil
Just a
Man's
link
Winning
below.
Tournament Strategies. And if you think you need more help than that, I do private lessons over Zoom. You can reach out to me at my website or something and schedule a lesson.
Sounds good. Thank you for your time. And when we get back, we'll try to get that Big O game going, and hopefully you could show off your Hold'em chops as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to traveling again and getting on the tournament trail and all of that.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Great.
Hey,
Thanks again, Wayne. And I look forward to seeing you in person at the bike soon.
sounds good. Take it easy.